Welcome back to the Deep Dive Wisdom for Your Day. Today we will be reviewing an amazing interview from podcast by the name Sabiduría con Álvaro Martínez.
And this is such an incredible one.
It really is. I want you to just imagine for a second that you are a farm worker in the Central Valley of California, and it's the early 1990s.
Right, so you're driving to the fields, it's pitch black out, sun isn't even up yet.
Exactly. You're just trying to make enough money to feed your family, and suddenly you see those flashing red and blue lights pop up in your rearview mirror.
Which is terrifying.
Yeah, because for most of us that means, a speeding ticket, maybe a frustrating fine. But for you, in that specific time and place, those lights don't mean a traffic citation.
No, they represent a massive existential threat.
Right. They mean potential deportation. They mean being separated from your kids or just losing your entire livelihood in the blink of an eye.
And when you face that kind of threat, you don't really think about pulling over safely. Your lizard brain just completely kicks in.
You just think, I have to run. I have to get out of here.
Which is pure survival instinct, right? It just overrides any kind of logical, legal compliance.
Absolutely.
And it was creating these incredibly dangerous situations. We're talking high-speed chases through rural areas, foot pursuits through actual agricultural fields.
Just absolute chaos over something minor.
Yeah, minor traffic infractions were instantly escalating into life or death scenarios. For the workers, the officers, everyone, it was just this massive systemic failure driven by fear.
A total breakdown of communication. And today we're going to look at the man who stepped right into that incredibly murky, dangerous intersection of law enforcement and cultural fear.
And he completely rewired how the system worked.
He really did. I am so excited about this one because we are unpacking the life of José Gutiérrez.
It's just such a remarkable narrative. We're going to explore not just what happened in his life, including this horrific tragedy in 1999 that changed everything.
That part is so heavy.
It is. But we're really going to drill down into the why. Why his specific approach to bridging the gap between the badge and the Latino community was so revolutionary.
Okay, let's unpack this from the very beginning. Because if we want to understand how he became this trailblazing public protector, we really have to understand the foundation.
Chronologically, it all starts with these deep, deep roots in Mexico.
Right. José's parents come from two very distinct regions. His father's from San Julián, Jalisco, and his mother is from a region in Sinaloa called the Hacienda de Tamarindo.
Which is really important context. You're talking about regions with incredibly strong agricultural traditions.
Very deep-seated cultural identities.
Exactly. So when they migrate, they aren't just bringing themselves, They're bringing generations of values centered around family, hard labor, and relying on your community.
So they start a family, and they end up having 7 children. José is the second oldest overall, but he's the eldest boy.
Which carries a lot of weight.
So much weight. Now, here is a fascinating geographic detail. The family was actually living in the border city of Tijuana, Mexico.
But his mother had this really intense long-term vision.
She totally did. She wanted her kids to have access to the U.S. educational system down the line. So she actually crossed the border so her children could be born in Chula Vista.
Over in San Diego County. That kind of logistical foresight is just incredible to me.
Right. It's so strategic.
Well, if we look at the historical context of the 60s and 70s, the U.S.-Mexico border around San Diego and Tijuana operated a lot more like a porous membrane than a rigid wall.
It was a very shared economic zone.
Exactly. Families with means or connections would frequently navigate both sides. But making the physical effort to ensure her children had birthright citizenship, that was a highly calculated move.
She was securing their future agency. But that strategic safety net gets deployed way sooner than anyone expected.
Because of the separation?
Yeah, by the late 70s, his parents separate and eventually divorce. We hit the year 1980, and the Mexican court formally grants custody of all 7 children to his mother.
And José is a teenager now.
He is. And his mother does something that I just find wild for a parent in a crisis. She sits these kids down and essentially puts their entire future to a vote.
Which is so rare.
She says, you can stay right here in Tijuana with your father, or we can cross the border, migrate to the United States together, and you can study.
What's fascinating here is the sheer respect she showed her children. Think about the immense stress she was under.
A newly single mother of 7.
Right, facing an international migration. The instinct for most parents in that survival mode is just strict authoritarianism. Like, we are doing this because I said so.
But instead, she offered them actual agency.
She presented the realities and just let them choose.
And the vote was unanimous. every single one of them chose to go with their mom to the U.S. But I want to pause and just think about the psychological weight of this specific moment for Jose.
It's massive.
It really is. It's the summer of 1980. This massive life-altering migration happens to fall exactly on his birthday, August 29th, 1980.
Wow.
He is turning 16 years old. He's the eldest boy in a very traditional household structure.
Right, so the expectations are already there.
He steps onto U.S. soil, and he describes feeling this intense, overwhelming duty to protect his mother. He resolved right then and there that he would not let her down.
That is a staggering amount of pressure for a 16-year-old. Developmentally, a kid that age is usually focused on pure validation, figuring out their own identity.
Not being the head of a household.
Exactly. But Jose experiences this instant psychological pivot. He becomes what psychologists might call a parentified child.
But it wasn't forced on him, right?
That's the key. It doesn't seem to stem from coercion. It stems from a profound emotional commitment to his mother's sacrifice.
That instinct to be the absolute guardian of his family's well-being becomes the psychological bedrock of his entire existence.
It really is the origin story of El Protector.
It totally is. So they make the move, and they end up in Delano, California. And let me be clear, this was not some suburban coming-of-age story for them.
Not at all. Delano is tough.
They move in with his mother's brother, Uncle Lazaro, who already has his own family. Space is incredibly tight, and immediately, that very summer, Jose and his siblings are sent out into the agricultural fields.
They're out there picking grapes and peaches. And if you know anything about the history of Delano, it is the epicenter of California's agricultural industry.
The site of some of the most grueling labor conditions in the country.
Picking peaches, for instance, isn't just hot work. You're dealing with the peach fuzz, which acts like microscopic fiberglass, just irritating your skin while you sweat in triple-digit heat.
Oh, that sounds miserable.
It is brutal, body-breaking work.
And what he experienced was beyond just the physical pain. He talks about how this labor completely broke open his worldview.
How so?
Well, he's a young, strong 16-year-old, and his back is aching. But he looks down the row, and he sees men and women in their 50s and 60s.
People who've been doing this for decades.
Exactly. People who have done this specific back-breaking labor their entire lives just to survive. He suddenly sees the invisible gears that turn the American economy.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the crucible where his professional empathy is forged.
He's living it.
Right, he isn't learning about the plight of the marginalized farm worker from a sociology lecture or a policy briefing. He's feeling it in his own muscles.
You can't unlearn that.
Exactly. When you bleed and sweat alongside someone, you stop seeing them as an abstract demographic. So years later, when he's wearing a badge, he doesn't see these workers as suspects or statistics.
He sees the profound, quiet dignity in their suffering.
That really does.
And that word dignity is the absolute core of how his mother ran their household. Let's talk about her because she fascinates me.
She was a force of nature.
She really was. She didn't just keep these kids alive. She systematically prepared them for adult responsibilities in a way that feels decades ahead of its time.
She essentially engineered an environment of absolute self-reliance.
Yes. She was a seamstress. She made wedding dresses. She made clothes for her own kids. But she refused to just be the servant of the house.
Which was very countercultural.
She taught her sons, not just the daughters, but her boys, how to use a sewing machine. She taught them how to hem their own pants.
I love that.
Even back in primary school, Jose was responsible for ironing his own uniforms. She taught them to clean windows, mop floors, and she demanded they know how to cook.
Right. He specifically remembers her saying, "You need to know how to fry your own eggs."
Which is such a specific, practical thing.
And it's an incredibly radical approach if you look at the gender dynamics of a traditional 1970s Mexican household. Usually the domestic sphere was strictly the domain of the women.
And the men were expected to just work outside.
Exactly. But she recognized something vital. Helplessness is a vulnerability. If you rely on someone else to feed you, clothe you, and clean for you, you are dependent. By teaching her sons these mundane domestic skills, she was stripping away any internalized helplessness. She was weaponizing self-sufficiency so her children would never be trapped in a state of dependency.
Hold on, I love that framing. Weaponizing self-sufficiency. Because it wasn't just about survival. It was about pride.
Absolutely.
Jose tells this story about their clothing that just blew my mind. They were incredibly poor. He points out that kids today might have 7 pairs of sneakers.
And they had, what, 1 pair?
His family had 1 pair for work and maybe 1 for Sunday church. To get by, he would go to Goodwill to buy secondhand clothes. He'd find 2 pairs of used jeans and a couple of long-sleeve shirts.
But his mother had a rule about those clothes.
An ironclad rule.
Yeah.
Those clothes had to be spotless.
Yeah.
If there was a stain, or if you tried to wear the same shirt 3 days in a row, she would literally stop you at the door.
Because poverty is an economic state, but dignity is a psychological one. She was teaching them that your financial circumstances do not dictate your self-respect.
You can still be clean.
Right. You might be wearing a stranger's old jeans from Goodwill, but you will wash them, iron them, and wear them with the pride of someone who values themselves.
It's an incredible psychological armor.
When you step out into a society that might look down on you for being a poor immigrant, having a crisp collar and clean shoes is a quiet, radical act of defiance.
It really is. And the crown jewel of her strategy, the ultimate way out, was education. She was the architect of this family's future.
She was.
I keep picturing her as this visionary CEO. She delegated all the household tasks, the ironing, the mopping, the cooking, so that the company, meaning her children, could focus entirely on long-term growth.
Growth through education. That is such an apt analogy. She understood opportunity costs perfectly.
Right, because Jose and his siblings, seeing how hard she was working, would sometimes say, "Mom, let me just drop out of school. Let me work full-time in the field so I can bring more money into the house."
And she shut that down immediately.
Completely. She said no. The education comes first. There will be time to make money later, but right now, your job is to prepare yourselves.
And the kicker is, she didn't just lecture them about it. She actually lived it.
Yes. As a grown woman, having only finished part of primary school herself, she enrolled in adult English as a second language classes, ESL.
Which is the ultimate form of leadership. You cannot demand continuous growth from your children if you aren't demonstrating it yourself.
It sets an undeniable standard.
Imagine being a teenager, complaining about your homework, and then you watch your mother, who has been managing a household of 7 and navigating a new country, sitting at the kitchen table sounding out English verbs.
Any excuse you had not to study just instantly evaporates.
She created an ecosystem where self-improvement was the baseline reality.
So we have this incredibly strong, self-sufficient foundation built inside their home. But I want to pivot to what happens when these kids actually walk out the front door.
Because the outside world was very different.
Stepping out into Modesto or Ceres, California in the 1980s as a Mexican immigrant was not a walk in the park. It was a complex, sometimes really hostile environment.
And this is where we start seeing the impact of external mentorship. Mentorship that, crucially, he first found within his own extended family structure.
Yes, his uncles, Uncle Lazaro, Uncle Marcos, Gilberto, Chago, these were agricultural contractors.
Hardworking, calloused men with families of their own.
They stepped up as the early male role models for Jose. And there's one specific memory he shares about Uncle Lazaro that just hits you right in the chest.
Oh, the story about the Christmas gift.
Exactly. Jose and his brothers were completely obsessed with baseball back in Tijuana. But they never had real gear. They played with whatever they could find.
Used broken hand-me-down gloves.
Yeah, they would stitch them together with whatever straps they could find. They just made do. But then, one Christmas, Uncle Lazaro arrives with presents, and he hands Jose a brand new, real leather baseball glove.
Oh.
Jose says that opening that box and smelling the new leather literally brought him to tears.
This raises an important point about the psychology of scarcity. When your entire life consists of making do with scraps, secondhand clothes, secondhand language, secondhand status in society.
Yeah, receiving something brand new is huge.
It's deeply disruptive in the best way possible. It wasn't just a leather glove. It was his uncle communicating, you have value. You deserve something pristine. You are seen.
I'm curious, though, why do you think that specific memory stands out so much decades later? Is it just the physical object? Or is it what the uncle represented?
It's absolutely what the uncle represented. His uncle was modeling a very specific type of masculinity. Often, in harsh environments, masculinity is modeled as purely aggressive or emotionally closed off.
Right, you have to be tough.
But his uncle showed him that you can be a tough man who works the fields, but you can also be generous, observant, and tender enough to buy a boy the exact thing he dreams of.
It gave Jose a template for the kind of man he wanted to become. And he desperately needed a positive template, because the alternative templates out on the streets were incredibly dangerous.
We're talking about the 1980s in the Central Valley.
There was a lot of overt racism aimed at them because of their accents and their skin color. But the most insidious threat was the gang culture.
Which is a classic tragic trap. When marginalized young men feel rejected by mainstream society, gangs offer an incredibly seductive alternative
Instant brotherhood, protection.
and a perverse sense of status.
So how did a house full of teenage boys avoid getting sucked into that? How did Jose steer clear? It circles right back to his mother's tactical genius.
She essentially weaponized hospitality.
She made their house the social center of gravity. She would cook massive meals. She encouraged her kids to invite all their friends over on Friday nights. Come eat, come hang out in the living room.
It's a brilliant counterinsurgency strategy, honestly. If you control the territory, you control the influences.
Right. But it wasn't just a free party. While she was serving food, she was running a quiet, rigorous vetting process. She was observing every single kid who walked through her door.
She was listening to the cadence of their speech, looking at their body language, assessing their respect levels.
Jose notes that if a kid came over and was throwing around gang slang or it seemed disrespectful to the home, she wouldn't yell or make a scene in front of everyone.
It would just cause a fight.
Exactly. Later, quietly, she would pull her kids aside and say, I don't think that person has good intentions. I don't want them around.
By doing this, she maintained her authority without alienating her children. She allowed them a social life, but she built a safe container for it.
They got to maintain their joy and their friendships.
But she filtered out the poison before it could take root in her sons. It's just incredible parenting.
But navigating the social scene was only half the battle. The biggest professional hurdle Jose faced was structural. It was the language barrier.
Which is a huge wall to climb.
At 16, he was technically old enough to start college courses, so he goes to Modesto Junior College. He sits down with an academic counselor.
Now, keep in mind, all of his previous schooling in Tijuana was entirely in Spanish.
Right, so the counselor looks at his profile and suggests something radical. They tell him, before you take a single regular college course, you need to spend an entire year taking nothing but ESL.
Which is a massive test of patience. Let's really consider the friction here. You have a young man who feels an intense, burning obligation to provide for his family and protect his mother.
He wants to get moving.
The instinct is to rush, to get a degree, to get a job, to make money now. Being told to hit the brakes and spend 12 months just learning the alphabet and grammar of a new language could easily be interpreted as a devastating setback.
Let me jump in there, because I would have been furious. I would have thought the system was trying to hold me back. Why didn't he just fight it or try to test out?
Because of that long-term vision his mother instilled in him, they didn't view it as a delay. They viewed it as pouring a concrete foundation.
Building the base.
And this is vital. Mastering English didn't mean erasing his Spanish. He spent that year becoming fully bilingual. He was layering the strict linguistic and structural codes of the United States on top of his deep, rich Mexican cultural identity.
And that dual competency became his absolute superpower. He could navigate the bureaucracy of American institutions perfectly, but he could also sit at a kitchen table, eat a plate of beans, and joke with an immigrant farm worker in the exact slang they understood.
He was building the bridge he would eventually walk across.
Exactly. He possessed the nuance to understand both the legal statutes of California and the cultural soul of the Latino community.
That intersection is incredibly rare.
Which brings us to the moment that bridge actually connects to his career. Because we have to ask, how does a kid picking peaches and taking ESL classes decide he wants to be a cop?
It's not a common pipeline.
Because in the 1980s, in immigrant communities, law enforcement was not seen as a friendly, community-oriented career path. It was an adversarial force.
Historically, policing in those areas was heavily punitive. The uniform represented a threat to stability, not a guarantor of safety.
So it wasn't a natural leap at all. But then the spark happens. Jose is driving, listening to a local Spanish radio station, and an interview comes on.
With a California Highway Patrol officer.
Yes, an officer named Jorge Chavez. And Jorge is on the radio speaking flawless, articulate Spanish. He's explaining traffic safety in a way that is respectful and relatable.
For Jose, this is a profound cognitive paradigm shift. Up until that exact moment, the identities of police officer and proud Latino were likely mutually exclusive in his mind.
You couldn't be both.
You were either part of the community or you were part of the institution policing the community. Hearing Jorge Chavez on that radio shattered that binary.
It was living proof that he didn't have to choose. He could bring his heritage, his empathy, and his language into the institution.
In fact, those traits wouldn't just be accepted, they would be critical assets.
It changes everything for him. He decides he wants in. Now, the application process for the CHP back then was famously slow and rigorous. It took him 2 full years of testing and background checks just to get accepted.
But he sticks with it.
He does. And finally, on December 12, 1988, he enters the California Highway Patrol Academy in Sacramento.
And the date is highly symbolic. December 12th is the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is a massive cultural and religious touchstone in Mexican heritage.
It felt like a blessing on his new path.
He graduates, puts on the badge, and gets his first assignment patrolling the streets of Bakersfield in Kern County. And Bakersfield is another massive, gritty agricultural hub.
He is immediately thrown into the deep end, learning the realities of the asphalt. He grinds it out for about 3 years.
And then things shift.
Then in 1991, an opportunity opens up that perfectly aligns his specific superpower with the needs of the state. He is sent up to Fresno to take a specialized training course designed specifically for bilingual officers.
There are 32 officers in this room learning how to effectively communicate with the Spanish-speaking community and the media.
And you will never guess who is teaching the course.
The very man who inspired him, Jorge Chavez.
It is the ultimate full-circle moment. He finally meets his idol in person. And whatever Jose did in that room, he clearly impressed people.
Because shortly after he gets back to Bakersfield, his commander pulls him aside.
And says, "You've been selected for a special assignment back in Fresno." He is recruited to be the spokesperson and the public face of a brand new program called El Protector.
And we really need to dissect the strategy behind El Protector because it was an absolute masterclass in psychological de-escalation. Let's start with the visuals. How did Jose present himself to the community in this role?
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because the visual strategy was completely counterintuitive to traditional policing.
He didn't look like a cop.
When Jose stepped into the El Protector role, he left his standard CHP uniform in the locker. He didn't wear the stiff tan shirt, the badge, the heavy utility belt, or the campaign hat.
None of it.
His uniform for this outreach was entirely civilian. A black polo shirt, black jeans, white sneakers, and a casual jacket.
Think about the semiotics of a police uniform. It is specifically designed to project authority, command compliance, and frankly, intimidate.
The heavy belt with the firearm and handcuffs visually communicates state-sanctioned force.
When an undocumented farm worker sees that uniform, their heart rate spikes. Their body goes into fight or flight. By choosing to wear a polo shirt and white sneakers, Jose was purposefully stripping away that psychological barrier.
He was visually communicating, "I am not here to arrest you. I am approachable. I am a person just like you."
And he had to do that because the systemic problem they were facing was reaching a boiling point. We touched on it at the beginning of the show, but let's dive deeper.
In the early 90s, you have this massive population of Latino farm workers driving the Central Valley roads.
Many are undocumented. Most only speak Spanish.
And the absolute terror they felt toward law enforcement was causing chaos, because the fear of deportation superseded the fear of a car crash. If they had a broken taillight and an officer lit them up, they assumed their life in America was over.
So they fled. They would hit the gas. Or they would pull over, jump out of the moving car, and literally sprint into the grape vineyards.
You had routine traffic stops turning into incredibly dangerous, high-speed pursuits. It was putting the officers in danger, it was getting the workers hurt or killed, and it was alienating the entire community.
So the mandate of El Protector was to aggressively change that narrative. Jose's job was to leverage his bilingualism to get on Univision, get on the local Spanish radio stations, show up at weekend swap meets and community fairs, and speak directly to the people.
He would stand there in his polo and sneakers and tell them, "Listen to me. We are the Highway Patrol. We do not care about your immigration status.
We are not out here to hunt you and deport you.
We are out here because you are driving too fast in the fog, and we want you to get home to your kids alive. Do not run from us. We speak your language. We understand you. We are here to help."
He was executing a profound pivot from punitive policing to empathetic education. He recognized that you cannot police a community out of fear.
You have to educate them into compliance.
Exactly. When a community truly believes that an officer isn't trying to destroy their livelihood over an expired registration, the panic subsides. They stop running. That is the essence of proactive, intelligent community building.
It was revolutionary. He spent years building that trust. But all of that trust, all of his skills as a communicator and a protector, were about to be put to the ultimate devastating test.
As we move into the late summer of 1999, the state of California experiences a trauma that forces a complete reckoning.
This is the crucible moment of his career. It's a tragedy that exposed how deeply broken the systemic protections for these workers really were.
We have to talk about the Cinco Puntas tragedy that happened in August of 1999.
I want to paint a vivid picture of the conditions that morning, because the specific details are what make this so heartbreaking, and they are exactly what drove the massive legal reforms that followed.
The setup for this crash was a perfect storm of regulatory neglect. For years, agricultural labor contractors were transporting workers in vehicles that were entirely unregulated and fundamentally unsafe.
Right. It was early morning, pre-dawn, and the Central Valley was blanketed in a thick, heavy fog, which anyone who has driven the 99 corridor knows is terrifyingly dense.
It's like driving through a cloud.
Out on the road is a modified cargo van. And when I say modified, I don't mean customized for comfort. I mean dangerously stripped down to maximize human cargo.
This van was carrying 15 farm workers.
The original factory seats with seatbelts had been completely ripped out. In their place, whoever owned the van had just bolted crude wooden benches to the metal floor.
The workers were packed in shoulder to shoulder, zero safety restraints. But what made it a literal death trap was what else was in the cabin with them.
Yes, the contractors didn't bother using a separate truck for equipment. So resting right there inside the passenger cabin, alongside these 15 human beings, were loose agricultural tools.
Heavy metal hose, shovels, clippers, irrigation equipment.
Through the fog, a massive double-trailer truck, loaded with tomatoes, is attempting to make a very slow U-turn across the rural two-lane road.
The driver of the farm worker van, blinded by the fog and likely speeding to get to the fields on time, doesn't see the massive side of the truck until it is inches away.
There are no skid marks. The van strikes the steel trailer at full speed. The blunt force impact alone is catastrophic, but physics turns the interior of the van into a blender.
Without seatbelts, 15 bodies are thrown violently forward.
The cheap wooden benches splinter and collapse, and those loose shovels and heavy metal tools become lethal projectiles, flying through the cabin at 60 miles an hour.
Oh, God. The human toll was almost incomprehensible. Out of the 15 farm workers in that van, 13 were killed.
13 people whose only crime was trying to get to work to feed their families, wiped out in a millisecond. The grief that ripped through the Latino community was absolute agony.
But the reaction from the state government, driven by the sheer preventable horror of the details, was swift and unprecedented.
The tragedy catalyzed a wave of emergency legislative changes. This wasn't a situation where politicians just offered thoughts and prayers.
The grotesque nature of the crash forced a structural reckoning. Assembly members Sarah Reyes and Dean Flores immediately drafted emergency legislation to overhaul how the agricultural industry moved its people.
Let's break down these specific laws, because they are a direct reaction to the physics of that crash. First, mandatory seatbelts for every single passenger in a farm labor vehicle. No more wooden benches.
Second, it became strictly illegal to have loose tools in the cabin. All equipment had to be secured in external toolboxes mounted outside the passenger area.
Third, they mandated transparent transportation fees, because contractors were price gouging these workers just for a ride in a death trap.
And finally, and maybe most importantly, anyone driving these vehicles now had to possess a Class B commercial license with a specific passenger endorsement.
Meaning the drivers actually had to be formally trained, medically cleared, and tested to prove they can handle the physics of transporting human beings safely.
The laws were incredibly robust. But hold on. A law on a piece of paper in Sacramento doesn't save a life in Fresno if no one is out there enforcing it.
And that is exactly where José Gutiérrez enters the picture. And the timing of this is almost cinematic.
It really is. At the time of the crash, Jose wasn't even in the Central Valley.
No, he had been on a special assignment down in San Diego for years, working as a bilingual liaison with Mexican authorities, tracking down and recovering stolen U.S. vehicles across the border.
And on the exact day he receives the results that he has passed his sergeant's exam, which officially makes him eligible to be a supervisor, his phone rings. It's the regional commander up in Fresno.
The commander essentially says, "Congratulations on your sergeant's stripes. Pack your bags. We have a crisis in the valley, and you are the only one who can lead the response."
He is pulled back to Fresno immediately to direct the newly formed SAFE task force.
It's a specialized group of 10 officers, with Jose as their sergeant. Their singular mandate is to enforce these new transportation laws, pull over the vans, inspect them, and ensure farm workers are not being treated like disposable cargo.
And this is where we see the culmination of every lesson his mother taught him about empathy and dignity. Let's look at the standard law enforcement playbook.
Another officer given that mandate might have hit the rural roads and just started writing thousands of dollars in tickets.
They would impound the vans, arrest the drivers, and aggressively penalize noncompliance.
I mean, wouldn't that have been the easiest way? Just shut them all down until they comply.
It's the easiest way to write a report, but it's the fastest way to destroy a community. Jose understood the economic ecosystem.
If you just aggressively ticket a driver who is likely a low-income immigrant themselves, they can't pay the fine.
They lose their license, the van gets impounded. If the van is impounded, the 15 farm workers have no right to the fields. If they don't work, crops rot on the vine, and 15 families can't pay rent.
Aggressive, blind enforcement would have collapsed the local microeconomy. So what did he do differently? How did he run the SAFE task force for 15 years without destroying the community?
He enforced the law through education and economic facilitation. If Jose pulled over a van and it failed inspection, say, the seatbelts weren't anchored correctly, he didn't just slap a massive fine on the windshield and tow the vehicle.
He would literally sit down with the driver, explain the mechanics of the law, and then help them find a local, certified mechanic who could weld the anchors correctly.
The police officer is acting as a referral service for mechanics.
Exactly. Because the goal isn't punishment, the goal is safety. By helping them fix the van, he fundamentally changed the economic incentive structure.
If a police officer is just a source of ruinous fines, the driver will flee. But if the officer is a pathway to getting the van legal so the driver can stay in business, compliance becomes their best economic option. He viewed the drivers as partners in safety, not adversaries.
That is profound. He was building the bridge while he was enforcing the law, but man, we have to acknowledge the personal cost of this.
Because carrying that level of responsibility for 15 years, absorbing the trauma of a community, and constantly fighting the bureaucracy, it takes a massive toll.
I want to shift gears and explore the toll of the badge, the reality of what it means to be a protector for decades. Let's start with the sheer physical reality.
The daily reality of a law enforcement officer is a slow, compounding drain on both the physical body and the psychological state.
Jose talks about the duty belt. We see cops on TV and don't think twice about it. But that utility belt with the firearm, the magazines, the handcuffs, the radio, the baton weighs 20 pounds.
Imagine strapping a 20-pound dumbbell around your waist and then doing an 8 to 12-hour shift.
Right. You are getting in and out of a low-riding cruiser dozens of times a day. You are running, you are wrestling with people, you are standing on hot asphalt for hours at a crash scene.
That uneven weight distribution grinds down your lower back, it destroys your hips, it elevates your blood pressure.
For a career officer, physical fitness isn't a vanity project. It is a literal survival requirement to keep your skeleton from collapsing.
And the mental weight is infinitely heavier. When you put on that uniform, you are trained to exist in a permanent state of hypervigilance. Your brain is rewired to constantly assess threats.
Jose notes that even now, in retirement, he cannot walk into a restaurant and just relax. He has to sit facing the door.
His brain automatically scans the room, locates the emergency exits, assesses the body language of the patrons, and mentally rehearses his tactical response if someone were to walk in with a weapon.
You don't just turn off a deeply ingrained survival mechanism. But the hypervigilance isn't even the hardest part. The emotional weight is what really breaks people.
He says the absolute darkest, most soul-crushing part of the job was dealing with child fatalities, especially cases that were preventable.
He talks about the horror of arriving at a crash scene and finding a child who has died simply because the parents didn't put them in a proper car seat.
That is secondary trauma in its purest form. And the officer's job isn't done when the ambulance leaves. They have to drive to a home, knock on a door, and look a mother or father in the eyes and deliver the news that their child is gone.
Accumulating those interactions year after year can easily turn an officer incredibly cynical, deeply angry at humanity, and emotionally numb.
I mean, I can't even imagine. I feel like I would hate the world after seeing that twice, let alone for 30 years. How did he not just become a hardened, cynical cop?
Because his core philosophy instilled by his mother in those early years remained completely intact. His fundamental rule of engagement was to treat every single person with empathy and dignity, regardless of what they had done or the situation he found them in.
He makes this brilliant observation about human nature. He says that in the vast majority of interactions, people act like a mirror. They reflect back the exact level of respect you project toward them.
If you swagger up to a car window, acting arrogant, aggressive, and condescending, the driver's ego is going to flare up. and you are going to get aggression and defiance right back.
But if you walk up, introduce yourself calmly, and show basic human respect, you immediately de-escalate the tension. You rob the interaction of its hostility before it even begins.
It circles right back to the lessons of the Goodwill close. Everyone, whether they are wearing a spotless shirt or sitting in handcuffs on the side of the highway, deserves to be treated with fundamental human dignity.
He has spent a lot of time distilling these heavy, complex lessons into advice for young students today who might be looking at a career in public service. And his advice is so refreshingly simple.
He tells them, be yourself, stay humble, communicate clearly, and above all, do not let your pride stop you from asking for help.
And he uses a fantastic traditional Mexican proverb to anchor this advice.
I love this proverb. He says, preguntando se llega a Roma, meaning, by asking questions, you can get to Rome, or sometimes he jokes, you can get to China.
The underlying wisdom is that admitting ignorance isn't a sign of weakness. It is the fundamental tool of progress. In any field, whether you want to be a state trooper, an accountant, or a surgeon, if you don't know the first step, the smartest thing you can do is find someone who does and ask.
It makes you think about our own lives, right? We all have those moments where our ego flares up.
Yeah.
How many times have you, listening to this right now, held yourself back from a new opportunity or a new path simply because you were embarrassed to ask a stupid question?
Jose's entire trajectory proves that curiosity combined with humility is an absolute superpower. And the amazing thing is, those superpowers didn't just vanish the day he turned in his badge.
Which brings us to the legacy phase of his life. Because for a man whose identity is entirely constructed around the verb to protect, the traditional concept of retirement is basically a myth.
Oh, he laughs at the idea. He explicitly says, I didn't retire to go sit on a beach in Mexico and get a tan.
Instead, he took all of that tactical knowledge, his vast network, and his deep community trust, and channeled it directly into the National Latino Peace Officers Association, the NLPOA, specifically the Fresno chapter.
He has been a driving force there. And under his leadership, they aren't just operating as a social club for retired cops.
They are functioning as a vital logistical resource for the marginalized communities of the Central Valley. They are out there raising significant money to provide scholarships for Latino youth who want to go to college.
When the winter temperatures drop into the freezing range, they are organizing massive coat drives to get warm winter jackets out to the farm workers who are still out there pruning vines in the frost.
They are packing backpacks with school supplies and driving them out to kids in deep rural areas who don't have access to well-funded school districts.
If you look closely, he hasn't changed careers at all. He is still protecting and providing for the exact same vulnerable communities he came from. He just traded the patrol car for a community organizing role.
And his advocacy has actually expanded into a totally new frontier, public health. For the past 8 years, he has served on the board of directors for United Health Centers, and he's risen to become the president of the board.
This is a massive clinic network, and it is crucial because a huge percentage of their patient base consists of agricultural workers.
Which means he is overseeing an organization that provides comprehensive care. We're talking dental, vision, and critically mental health services.
Let's pause on the mental health aspect because that is huge. Why is providing mental health care in that specific community such a big deal?
Because in many immigrant and agricultural communities, there is a deep-seated cultural stigma around discussing anxiety, depression, or trauma.
You add that stigma to the profound systemic barriers of language access, lack of insurance, and fear of institutions, and you have a massive population suffering in silence.
By putting a trusted figure like José El Protector at the head of the health board, you lend immense credibility to the clinics. He is leveraging his lifetime of goodwill to convince his community that it is safe to seek healing both physically and mentally.
And his understanding of health and caregiving isn't just administrative. It was forged in the most intensely personal, heartbreaking way possible. He had to care for his own mother in her final years.
The woman who taught him absolute resilience, who marched them across the border to secure their future, ultimately needed his physical strength to survive.
Her final years were an immense battle. She suffered from Parkinson's disease for over a decade, which slowly robbed her of her mobility and independence. And then, during the height of the global pandemic, she contracted COVID-19, not just once, but twice.
Given her advanced age and the severe underlying conditions with the Parkinson's, the hospital system essentially gave up. They told the family there was nothing more modern medicine could do and sent her home.
But Jose and his siblings, infused with her absolute refusal to surrender, refused to accept that. They executed a coordinated caregiving operation that is a stunning reflection of the unity she instilled in them as children.
The siblings organized a strict rotation, providing 247 care in her home. And Jose describes this one process that is just so moving and so physically intense. Because of the Parkinson's, she couldn't move her body to clear her lungs of the fluid from COVID.
So 4 of the siblings would surround her bed, grab her, and physically flip her over onto her stomach. He jokes that they called her Superwoman when they did it.
And then a 5th sibling would vigorously pat her back to loosen the congestion so she could breathe.
The symbolism is almost overwhelming. The mother, who taught them to work as a unified team to survive the harshness of migration and poverty, was now surviving solely because they worked as a unified team to care for her body.
It is the purest return on the investment she made in their character. It is the ultimate full circle. Yeah. And looking at all this, it shows you the kind of incredibly well-rounded man José Gutiérrez became.
He is a tactician, a protector, a caregiver, a leader. He grounds himself by feeding both his intellect and his cultural soul.
On one hand, he studies modern leadership. He talks about reading Jocko Willink, exploring how elite military discipline and extreme ownership can be applied to daily civilian life.
He reads Stephen Covey's The Eighth Habit to constantly refine his organizational leadership skills. He embraces the stoic, disciplined mindset required for high-stakes leadership.
But he perfectly balances that with a deeply romantic, emotive cultural anchor.
Yes, I love this detail about him. He is a huge fan of romantic Latin music. He listens to Luis Miguel. He loves Marc Anthony.
And he has a profound appreciation for traditional rancheras. He specifically mentions the legendary Vicente Fernandez and a song called Botas de Charro,
which is a beautiful, deeply cultural touchstone.
Can you explain the significance of that song? He made a really interesting comparison about it.
Absolutely. Botas de Charro is a classic ranchera that tells the story of a young boy who is in love and the transition he makes as he grows into a man putting on his charro boots to prove his worth.
Jose describes it as the masculine equivalent of a quinceañera. It's a musical rite of passage. It celebrates male maturation, not through violence or aggression, but through love, honor, and deep emotional sincerity.
It perfectly encapsulates who he is. It highlights that you can be tough enough to wear a badge for 30 years, disciplined enough to lead a task force, and resilient enough to care for a dying parent, while remaining deeply connected to art, romance, and empathy.
The stoic warrior and the romantic poet are not mutually exclusive. In fact, the greatest leaders require a healthy dose of both.
Exactly. Without the empathy, the discipline just becomes cruelty.
So let's zoom out and look at the sheer scope of the journey we've just taken. We started with a 16-year-old boy stepping onto foreign soil on his birthday, feeling a crushing weight of protecting his mother and siblings.
We saw him sweat in the unforgiving heat of the Delano grape fields, internalizing the profound dignity of hard labor.
We watched his mother systematically strip away his helplessness, teaching him to iron, cook, and stand tall in secondhand clothes, forging a resilience that poverty couldn't touch.
We tracked his unlikely evolution into law enforcement, watching him dismantle the terrifying binary structure of traditional policing.
As El Protector, he traded the intimidating uniform for a polo shirt, using his language and his deep cultural empathy to stop undocumented farm workers from running in terror, replacing deeply rooted fear with hard-earned trust.
We stood in the devastating, foggy aftermath of the 1999 Cinco Puntas crash, witnessing how the loss of 13 innocent lives forced a state to finally reckon with its systemic failures.
And we saw Jose step up to lead the SAFE task force, not with the iron fist of a punisher, but with the open hand of a facilitator educating drivers, helping them fix their vans, and engineering an economic ecosystem that valued human life over ticket quotas.
But we see him today, refusing to rest, still providing healthcare, college scholarships, and winter coats to the very same fields he once worked.
If there is one core theme that binds his entire existence, it is that true leadership is inextricably rooted in community and humility.
The lesson is clear. You cannot effectively lead a people you do not genuinely love, and you cannot protect a community whose fears you do not bother to understand.
And it all traces back to those early lessons in that crowded house in Modesto. Jose's mother prepared him to change the state of California, not by handing him a leadership manual, but by teaching him how to iron his own crisp collar and fry his own eggs.
It really makes you wonder, what mundane, everyday tasks are you doing today that are secretly building the resilience you'll need for your greatest challenges tomorrow?
So what does this all mean? It means the monumental bridges we build in our communities, the ones that save lives and change laws, always start with the quiet values we practice in our own homes. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. We invite you to reflect on the bridges you can build in your own life, the questions your pride might be afraid to ask, and the radical dignity you can offer to everyone around you. Until next time.